Mafia. This word has long become a generic term and even somewhat worn out. Today, this term is used not only for criminal groups organized along ethnic lines, but also for any close-knit team united by common goals and ideas. Journalists have come up with all sorts of mafias: Japanese, Yakuza, Russian, Irish. But there was a time when only one organization was called the Mafia, the Sicilian crime syndicate, or Cosa Nostra. The Sicilian Mafia is undoubtedly the most famous criminal organization in the world. Hundreds of books have been written about it, and dozens of movies and TV series have been made. The first association with the word mafia is the brilliant film The Godfather, starring Marlon Brando. Despite its cult status, the Sicilian Mafia continues its criminal activities to this day, causing headaches for law enforcement in various countries. Of course, Cosa Nostra's golden age is already over. Well, in this episode, we'll talk about when the Sicilian Mafia emerged, how it ended up in the United States, and why it became famous on American soil. What Sicilian mafiosi are involved in today. You'll also learn about the structure of Cosa Nostra, the rules that all its members must follow, and the most notorious crimes and failures of this mafia. My name is Semyon, and welcome to How They Lived. Let's begin. A bit of history, or why the Mafia originated specifically in Sicily. Why did the Mafia appear specifically in Sicily? The very geographical location of the island and its history contributed to the emergence of a powerful criminal organization. For several centuries, Sicily was ruled by foreigners who were primarily interested in the island's riches and didn't care about the lives of the local population. Byzantines, Arabs, Spaniards, Normans, and French, all of them treated the proud Sicilian people with disdain and ruthlessly exploited the local peasants and landowners. The Sicilians responded to the occupiers in kind, periodically rising up in rebellions or starting guerrilla warfare. When it came to defending their interests, the island's inhabitants demonstrated a strong capacity for self-organization. For example, as early as the 9th century, voluntary self-defense units appeared in Sicily, protecting fishermen and peasants from the abuses of the Arab invaders and various kinds of bandits. And the local population, as a sign of gratitude, supplied the militia with fish, grain, and money. In the troubled 12th century for the island, a strange and mysterious sect called the Vindicosi Avengers appeared in Palermo. Its members wore black hoods that covered their faces. They helped people take revenge for insults or injustices. However, not for free. They took payment in money or in return for services. The sect existed all the way up to the 18th century. It reached its peak during the time of Spanish rule over the island. The tradition of gratitude for protection overlapped with a peculiar Sicilian code of honor that had arisen in ancient times. It stated that every man should be able to stand up for himself and instantly respond to any injustice or disrespect. And these are the main principles of behavior for any mafioso: to respect others, but also to demand the same unconditional respect for oneself. The ability to stand up for yourself and your family. The strong dislike Sicilians had for outsiders led to the emergence of many gangs that robbed only foreigners. The bandits gave part of their loot to the peasants, receiving help and support from them in return. They were not only involved in their criminal business, but also lent money, settled conflicts, and provided protection. The authority of criminal groups among the local population grew. Gradually, they became an important element of Sicilian society. This is how a social base for the future emergence of the mafia itself was being formed on the island. Over time, criminal leaders actually began to rule villages and small towns. Speaking of the name itself, it is believed that the word mafia comes from mafioso, which translates as a self-confident, but at the same time fearless, enterprising, and proud person. Allegedly, that's what people around called members of Sicilian gangs. Interestingly, they themselves didn't want to give their organization or movement any names at all. They like to say, "We are just ordinary, humble people." We have our own business, we don't interfere with anyone, but we won't let anyone interfere with our business either. Our business in Sicilian sounds like Cosa Nostra. It is believed that the Sicilian Mafia finally took shape and acquired its modern features during the period of Bourbon rule on the island. Their power was weak and could not stand up to the united and daring mafiosi. And when Italy was finally unified, it turned out that Cosa Nostra practically ruled Sicily without opposition. In 1865, the prefect of Palermo referred to the local criminal groups as the Mafia for the first time in his report. That's how the Sicilian criminal syndicate officially got its own name. Cosa Nostra lived and thrived, effectively running the island until the Fascists came to power in Italy. They declared a war of total destruction on the Mafia. Benito Mussolini could not tolerate the fact that Rome had no real power over Sicily. To eradicate the Mafia, Mussolini sent one of the toughest law enforcement officers in Italy, Cesare Mori. He became the prefect of Palermo and was given unlimited authority. Dark times began for the Mafia. Mori spared no effort in trying to carry out the dictator's orders. He used any means: illegal arrests, raids, kidnapping of relatives, torture, blackmail. The black shirts, together with the police, surrounded city districts and detained anyone even slightly suspected of collaborating with the Mafia. Such actions had an effect. Perhaps for the first time in history, the Sicilian Mafia was almost completely neutralized. Its members began fleeing the country, and those who couldn't escape ended up in prison. Crime on the island sharply declined. Mussolini and Mori were already celebrating victory, although, as it turned out, it was too soon. Despite all the repression, Cosa Nostra was still alive and had not forgotten a thing. The Mafia dons who remained free came to hate Mussolini and took revenge at the first opportunity. They established contact with the Anglo-American allies and did everything they could to help liberate the island. As a result, Mussolini was shot. But the Mafia also suffered a powerful blow, one from which it was never able to recover.
Cosa Nostra в Америке.
Sicily has always been very poor. That's why people left in search of a better life. At the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries, Sicilians moved en masse to the United States, bringing the traditions of Cosa Nostra to their new homeland. Soon, an entire Italian neighborhood appeared in New York. It was called Little Italy. Life here in those days was harsh and impoverished. Everything was controlled by Cosa Nostra. In the US, the Sicilian Mafia was mainly involved in racketeering. Later, they also took control of the gambling business and prostitution. However, the real golden age for the Sicilian dons began in 1920 after the introduction of prohibition. The production and sale of alcohol were completely banned in the United States, but people didn't start drinking any less. The Mafia began supplying them with alcohol. The underground alcohol trade brought gangsters enormous profits, which far exceeded the income from traditional crimes. However, as we know, there's no such thing as too much money. That's why, in the 1920s, a fierce and bloody conflict broke out between the Sicilian families. It became more widely known as the Castellamarese War. The winner was Salvatore Maranzano, a ruthless and cold-blooded gangster. He was a staunch supporter of old traditions. After taking the top spot in the underworld, he began to reform the American Cosa Nostra. Maranzano strictly divided the spheres of influence among the Mafia families. Each of them was given control over a major American city, and no one had the right to encroach on that territory. However, this rule did not apply to New York. The city's territory was divided among 5 different families. In total, 26 criminal families were formed across the United States. Maranzano himself took the title of Capo di tutti capi, or boss of all bosses, and he became the head of the Sicilian Mafia in the United States. However, his triumph did not last long. After becoming America's top crime boss, Maranzano succumbed to pride and arrogance. He forced the other bosses to pay him tribute, which caused a very negative reaction among the families. They respected Maranzano, but they were not going to humiliate themselves before him. All of this ended sadly, though predictably, for the boss of all bosses. On September 10, 1931, a group of 4 killers burst into Maranzano's office and shot him dead with handguns. After the death of Salvatore Maranzano, the title of Capo di tutti capi was abolished and the management of the Mafia was taken over by the Commission, a council of the most influential dons. However, it was decided to keep the territorial division because it worked effectively. In 1933, prohibition was repealed, which dealt a powerful blow to the Mafia. And soon the Great Depression began and things in the US got really bad. The Mafia began to explore new sources of profit. In the middle of the last century, Cosa Nostra took over many labor unions. They took control of garbage removal from cities, construction, and freight transportation. They say that not a single major construction project in New York could be carried out without the approval of the 5 families. In the 1950s, the Mafia transported rum and sugar from Cuba and then practically bought out the entire Cuban gambling industry. However, after the revolution's victory, all the gangsters' investments in Cuba went up in smoke. Fidel Castro even banned American investments in the island's economy to put an end to the Mafia's presence in the country. But Cuba was hardly the only example. Even the famous Las Vegas was under complete control of gangsters for decades. The profits that the Mafia made from it amount to hundreds of millions of dollars. It can't be said that the American government didn't fight against the Mafia. However, the Sicilian guys turned out to be tough nuts to crack. They bribed judges, officials, and police officers, intimidated witnesses, and waged press campaigns. They had the best lawyers and legal experts at their disposal. Until the 1960s, many people in the US didn't even believe in the existence of the Mafia as a global criminal organization with a strict hierarchy. It took several high-profile court cases for American society to finally understand who they were dealing with. Only by the early 1980s did the FBI manage to strip the Mafia of control over Las Vegas and literally push them out of the labor unions. How is the Mafia organized? There are many criminal groups in the world, some of which are formed along ethnic lines. However, nobody really knows anything about them. Well, except for law enforcement officers, of course. The secret of Cosa Nostra's success lay mainly in the structure of the organization, as well as the rules by which its members lived. At the very bottom of the Mafia hierarchy are the soldiers. These are the real cannon fodder, doing the dirtiest, most dangerous, and lowest paid work. In the old days back in Sicily, soldiers usually didn't live long, but now, of course, things aren't nearly as bloody. A soldier can move up the career ladder and become a capo. A capo is the next step in the gangster hierarchy. To become a capo, a soldier must prove his loyalty and willingness to give his life for the family. This is the main requirement, but there are others. A capo must be able to communicate with people, make quick decisions, and have leadership qualities. Although a capo is only second in the hierarchy, it is a very important and well-paid position. Usually a capo commands 8 to 10 soldiers. It can be added that if a soldier has managed to become a capo, it means he has already done pretty well in the criminal underworld. In the family, the capo is led by the so-called underboss. Essentially, this is the right-hand man of the don, the head of the family. He assigns tasks among the capos and monitors their completion. The underboss is aware of all current matters and, so to speak, handles the gangsters' day-to-day operations. Often, in the event of the boss's death, the underboss takes his place. At the head of the Mafia family is the don. He is chosen by a vote of all the capos. Previously, all members of the family participated in the elections, but then this practice was abandoned because it attracted the attention of law enforcement. The don runs the family and makes strategic decisions. He can order the killing of any family member, not explain anything to anyone, or simply say that the person deserved it. The consigliere, or advisor, is the person whom the don trusts and whose advice he listens to. Often, the consigliere handles the legal side of the Mafia's business. For example, he manages casinos or oversees legal matters. Often it is through advisors that connections with corrupt politicians and officials are made. He represents the family at meetings with other Mafia clans. The consigliere doesn't have his own crew in the family, but his status is extremely high. Sometimes he is the real brains of the criminal clan. There are also so-called associates, people who are not members of the family but are close to it. A person may be in this status before being accepted as a mafia member, but there are other options as well. Non-Italians cannot get into the family, so for them, associate status is the highest they can rise in the gangster hierarchy. Mafia rules. Now a few words about the rules of the Mafia, because it was these rules that allowed Cosa Nostra to become what it is. There are actually a lot of them. I'll just mention the most important ones. Omerta. Omerta is often called the law of silence, but that's a bit of an oversimplification. Naturally, when detained, a family member is simply obliged to keep silent. Any words spoken by a gangster to the police can be considered betrayal. A true mafioso must go to prison in silence without betraying his accomplices. However, Omerta is not just about how to behave during interrogations. It covers a much wider range of issues. Essentially, it is an unwritten code of conduct. At its core is a complete refusal of criminals to cooperate with the state. For example, Omerta prescribes not interfering in other people's affairs, and even more so, not reporting committed crimes to law enforcement. A gangster has no right to turn to the authorities for help, even if he himself has become a victim of a crime. For offenses committed against you or your family, you must take revenge personally. Omerta also forbids selling or using drugs. Killing judges or police officers is forbidden, so as not to bring law enforcement scrutiny down on the family. You must never discuss family matters with outsiders. Breaking Omerta means death for a mafioso. There are also less strict rules in Omerta, but they must be followed as well. For example, a proper mafioso should not sleep with the wives or girlfriends of other gangsters so as not to provoke conflicts within the family. Also, ordinary members of the mafia are forbidden to wear mustaches and beards. Nationality. Only a person of Italian or Italian-American descent can become a member of the family. Representatives of other nationalities can cooperate with the mafia, but they have no chance of joining its ranks. The most that, say, the Irish or the French can hope for is to become an accomplice. This rule emerged when Cosa Nostra first appeared on American soil and is still strictly followed to this day. Sponsorship. But even for people with the right nationality, getting into the family isn't easy. They don't just take people off the street into Cosa Nostra. You can only become a gangster after a personal recommendation from a capo. It's clear that in this case, the sponsor is fully responsible for the behavior of the person he brought into the family. Relatives of police officers and unfaithful husbands. A person whose close relative works in law enforcement cannot join a mafia family. Someone who cheats on his wife also cannot expect to become a member of the family. Mafiosi have a very reverent attitude toward family values. A gangster's wife is seen as his public face, so she is supposed to be treated with respect. The initiation ritual and the code of laws and rules for the American Mafia were written by Salvatore Moranzano, whom I mentioned earlier. He also introduced the initiation ritual, which was based on medieval Sicilian traditions. In the presence of other family members, the initiate's finger is pricked and his blood is dripped onto the image of a saint. After that, the icon is set on fire and given to the initiate to hold. He holds it until it burns completely. After that, he solemnly recites the words of the oath. Let my flesh burn like this holy image if I do not follow the rules of the Mafia. The initiation ritual into the Mafia is highly symbolic. Essentially, a person swears before God to obey the laws of the family and accepts death if he breaks Omerta. Members of the Mafia must strictly observe the laws and honor their family. But in reality, these rules started to be broken later, almost immediately after they were established. For example, in the family, people were often recruited for money, not for their merits or skills. Alcohol use, drugs, and cheating on wives were also overlooked, even though such things were supposed to get you expelled from the Mafia. The ban on drug trafficking has been routinely violated for years. This business has long brought in huge sums for the family.
Вместо эпилога.
The Sicilian Mafia has not faded into history. It still exists today. For example, in January 2011, indictments were issued in the United States against 127 members of the Italian Mafia. The charges included murder, robbery, extortion, racketeering, drug trafficking, and illegal gambling. And in January 2023, European law enforcement officers arrested Matteo Messino, the last boss of the Italian Cosa Nostra. He had been evading justice for a whole 30 years. However, they never managed to convict him. He died of cancer in prison. There were other high-profile arrests as well. In recent years, Italy has spared no effort to eradicate Cosa Nostra. The Mafia is still strong, but it's just an echo of its former glory. The Prohibition era is rightfully considered the golden age for the Mafia. The Roaring Twenties and the Great Depression of the 30s. It was during this period that the Mafia was at its strongest and most influential. Today's gangster groups are just a shadow of their former greatness. Well, that's all. See you in the next episode. Bye.